It all started with a stupid mistake at an office party. One moment of weakness, and my entire life came crashing down around me. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how I royally screwed up everything I held dear. You know those couples everyone envies? The ones who seem to have it all figured out? Well, that was Lucas and me. High school sweethearts turned power couple. At least that's what everyone thought. We'd been together for 15 years, married for 10 of those, and from the outside looking in, we were the epitome of relationship goals. But let me tell you, appearances can be deceiving. Don't get me wrong, I loved Lucas. He was my rock, my best friend, and the person I thought I'd grow old with. We'd been through thick and thin together, supporting each other's dreams and ambitions. I was killing it in sales, and Lucas had just landed a prestigious position at a top construction firm. Everything seemed perfect. Then James waltzed into our lives, and everything went to hell. It was a Tuesday evening when Lucas came home, his face a storm cloud of frustration. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when he slammed the front door. Rough day, I called out, trying to keep my tone light. Lucas stomped into the kitchen, loosening his tie with angry jerks. You have no idea, he growled, collapsing onto a bar stool. Remember that new boss I told you about, James? I nodded, sliding a glass of wine across the counter to him. The one who got the job through connections, right? That's the one, Lucas said, taking a long swig. He's completely incompetent, Emma. Today he dumped an entire project on my desk, one that he was supposed to handle, and told me it needed to be done by Friday. I frowned, setting down my knife. That's not fair. Can't you talk to HR about it? Lucas laughed bitterly. And say what? That the boss is making me do my job? No, I just have to suck it up and do it. I walked around the counter and wrapped my arms around him from behind. I'm sorry, babe. Is there anything I can do to help? He shook his head, patting my hand. No, just, I might be working late for the next few days. Don't wait up for me, okay? I kissed his cheek and went back to making dinner, all the while thinking about how I could make things better for him. Little did I know, I was about to make everything so much worse. The annual company picnic rolled around a few weeks later. It was a big deal. Families were invited, and it was a chance for everyone to mingle outside of the office. Lucas had been dreading it, but I convinced him it would be good to show his face. Come on, I said as we walked across the park, a fruit salad balanced in my hands. It'll be fun. Plus, I'll finally get to meet this infamous James. Lucas grunted, his eyes scanning the crowd. Trust me, you don't want to. But oh, how wrong he was. We'd found a spot to set up our blanket, and Lucas went off to grab us some drinks. I was arranging our food when I heard a deep, rumbling laugh behind me. I turned, and there he was, James. Now, Lucas had described James as a smarmy, middle-aged guy with a receding hairline and a beer gut. The man standing before me was anything but. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, James exuded confidence and charm. He was talking to a group of people, all of whom seemed hanging on his every word. I couldn't help but stare, and that's when he caught my eye. With a smile that could melt ice, he excused himself from his group and walked over to me. You must be Emma, he said, extending his hand. I'm James. I've heard so much about you from Lucas. I took his hand, feeling a jolt of electricity run through me. All good things, I hope, I managed to say, my voice sounding breathier than I intended. James laughed, and I swear I felt it in my bones. Of course, Lucas is always singing your praises. I can see why now. I felt my cheeks flush at his compliment. Well, I'm sure Lucas exaggerates, I said, trying to downplay the moment. He tends to do that. I don't think so, James replied, his eyes never leaving mine. If anything, I'd say he undersold you. Before I could respond, Lucas appeared at my side, 2 plastic cups in his hands. His eyes darted between James and me, a frown creasing his forehead. I see you've met my wife, Lucas said, his tone clipped as he handed me a drink. James clapped Lucas on the shoulder, and I couldn't help but notice how Lucas tends to the touch. Indeed I have. You're a lucky man, Lucas. Emma here is absolutely charming. Lucas forced a smile. Yes, I know. If you'll excuse us, James, we were just about to eat. James nodded, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. Of course. Enjoy your afternoon, both of you. Emma, it was a pleasure. As he walked away, I found myself watching him go. Lucas cleared his throat, snapping me out of my daze. What was that about? He asked, his voice low and tight. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Just being friendly. Isn't that what these things are for? Lucas didn't respond, just sat down on our blanket and began unpacking our food with more force than necessary. I joined him, but my mind kept drifting back to James and that magnetic smile. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about James more and more. It was innocent at first, just wondering what he was like as a boss, curious about the man who seemed to have such an effect on my husband. But as time went on, my thoughts became less innocent. I started paying more attention when Lucas talked about work, hemming on every mention of James. I'd ask questions, trying to learn more about him, all under the guise of being a supportive wife. So, how was work today? I asked one evening as we sat on the couch, the TV droning in the background. Lucas shrugged, not looking up from his phone. Same old, same old. James dumped another project on me at the last minute. I perked up at the mention of James' name. Oh, what kind of project? Lucas finally looked at me, his eyebrows furrowed. Since when are you so interested in the details of my work? I tried to keep my voice casual. I'm just trying to be supportive, Lucas. You've been so stressed lately. I thought talking about it might help. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. It's a new development downtown. James wants me to completely redesign the foundation plans by next week. It's impossible. I'm sure you can do it, I said, patting his knee. James must think highly of you to trust you with such an important project. Lucas snorted. Yeah, right. He's just lazy and doesn't want to do it himself. I felt a flare of annoyance at Lucas's words. Maybe he just recognizes your talent. You shouldn't be so hard on him, Lucas. He's your boss after all. Lucas stared at me, his mouth agape. Are you seriously defending him right now? After everything I've told you about how he treats me? I backpedaled quickly. No, of course not. I'm just trying to see the bright side, that's all. But the damage was done. Lucas got up from the couch, shaking his head. I'm going to bed. I have a long day tomorrow, thanks to James. As he walked away, I felt a twinge of guilt. But it was overshadowed by the thrill I felt every time I thought about James. I told myself it was harmless, just a little crush, nothing more. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. The next company event was a formal dinner to celebrate a successful quarter. I spent hours getting ready, telling myself it was because I wanted to look good for Lucas, to remind him of the woman he fell in love with. But if I was honest with myself, I knew it was for James. I chose a form-fitting black dress that showed just enough cleavage to be enticing without being scandalous. I curled my hair, applied smoky eyeshadow, and slipped on my highest heels. When I emerged from our bedroom, Lucas's eyes widened as he took in my appearance. Wow, Emma, you look amazing. I smiled, a mixture of guilt and excitement churning in my stomach. Thanks, babe. You don't look so bad yourself. As we drove to the event, Lucas kept glancing at me, a small frown on his face. You really went all out tonight, he commented, his tone careful. I shrugged, pretending to adjust my airing. It's a big night for the company, right? I wanted to look my best for you. Lucas nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. When we arrived at the venue, a swanky hotel ballroom, my eyes immediately began scanning the crowd. I told myself I was looking for familiar faces, but I knew who I was really searching for. And then I saw him. James was standing near the bar, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit. He was talking to a group of people, but the moment we walked in, his eyes locked onto mine. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me, and I unconsciously smoothed down my dress. Lucas placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me towards a table. "Let's find our seats," he said, his voice tight. I reluctantly tore my gaze away from James and followed my husband. Throughout dinner, I found my attention constantly drifting to where James sat at the head table. More than once, I caught him looking in my direction, and each time, my heart raced a little faster. Lucas, on the other hand, grew increasingly sullen as the night wore on. After the meal, people began to mingle. Lucas was pulled into a conversation with some colleagues, leaving me alone at our table. I was debating whether to join him when I felt a presence behind me. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, Emma." I turned to find James standing there, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. He offered one to me, and I took it without hesitation. "Thank you," I said, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "You clean up pretty well yourself." James chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "I do try. Would you care to dance?" I knew I should say no. I knew I should find Lucas and stick by his side. But the champagne was buzzing in my veins, and James was looking at me like I was the only woman in the room. Before I could stop myself, I nodded. James led me to the dance floor, placing his hand on my waist. As we began to sway to the music, I couldn't help but notice how perfectly we fit together. His cologne enveloped me, a heady mix of citrus and wood that made my head spin. "I've been wanting to get you alone all night," James murmured, his lips close to my ear. I pulled back slightly, my heart pounding. "James, I'm married. To your employee." He smiled, a predatory glint in his eye. "I know. But that doesn't change the fact that there's something between us, Emma. I can feel it. Can't you?" I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out, because he was right. There was something between us, an attraction so powerful it terrified me. Just then, I caught sight of Lucas over James's shoulder. He was staring at us, his face a mask of hurt and anger. Guilt washed over me, and I stepped back from James. "I'm sorry, I can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. "I need to go." I hurried off the dance floor, leaving James standing there. I made my way to Lucas, who was now downing a glass of whiskey in a bar. "Lucas, He cut me off, his voice cold. "Save it, Emma. I saw enough." "It was just a dance," I protested weakly. Lucas laughed bitterly. "Right. Just like it was just being friendly at the picnic. Or just being supportive when you defend him all the time. Do you think I'm blind?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "Lucas, please. You're overreacting." "Am I?" he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid a scene. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is falling for my boss right in front of me." Before I could respond, James appeared at my side. "Is everything all right here?" James asked, his voice laced with concern that seemed more performative than genuine. Lucas's eyes darted between James and me, his jaw clenching. "Everything's just peachy," he spat. "Why didn't you ask my wife for another dance? She seemed to be enjoying your company more than mine." I felt my face burn with shame. "Lucas, please, let's not do this here." James placed a hand on my shoulder, and I saw Lucas's eyes narrow at the gesture. "Perhaps we should all step outside for a moment," James suggested smoothly. "Clear the air." Lucas knocked back the rest of his whiskey and slammed the glass on the bar. "Fine, let's go." We made our way through the crowded ballroom and out onto a deserted terrace. The cool night air hit me like a slap, sobering me up from the champagne-induced haze I'd been in. As soon as the door closed behind us, Lucas rounded on James. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my wife?" James held up his hands, the picture of innocence. "Lucas, I assure you, I meant no disrespect. Emma and I were just dancing." "Bullshit," Lucas snarled. "I've seen the way you look at her. The way you both look at each other. Do you think I'm an idiot?" I stepped between them, my heart racing. "Lucas, please calm down. Nothing is going on between James and me." Lucas laughed bitterly. "Oh really? Then why have you been dressing up like this? Why do you always defend him? Why do you hang on his every word? I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out, because deep down I knew he was right. I had been dressing up for James. I had been defending him. I had been thinking about him far more than I should have been. James cleared his throat. Lucas, I think you're reading too much into this. Emma is a beautiful woman, and yes, I enjoy her company. But I would never cross that line. She's your wife, and you're my employee. Something in Lucas snapped at those words. My employee? Is that all I am to you? The guy you dump all your work on so you can flirt with his wife. Before I could react, Lucas's fist connected with James's jaw. James stumbled backward, his hand flying to his face. Lucas! I screamed, grabbing his arm to stop him from throwing another punch. What are you doing? James straightened up, his eyes flashing with anger. You're fired, Lucas. Pack up your desk tomorrow. Lucas laughed, a hollow broken sound. Fine by me. I quit anyway. I'm done with both of you. He turned to me, his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. And I'm done with this marriage. Don't bother coming home tonight, Emma. I won't be there. With that, he stormed back into the ballroom, leaving James and me alone on the terrace. I stood there, shell-shocked, as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. My marriage was falling apart, and it was all my fault. James approached me cautiously. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I turned to him, anger suddenly flaring in my chest. Didn't you? You've been flirting with me for weeks, knowing I'm married to your employee. What did you think was going to happen? James had the decency to look ashamed. I don't know. I just felt this connection with you, and I couldn't ignore it. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've ruined my marriage and Lucas's career in one fell swoop. I started to walk away, but James caught my arm. Emma, wait. Where are you going to go? I yanked my arm away from him. That's none of your business. Just leave me alone, James. You've done enough. I rushed back into the ballroom, tears blurring my vision. I scanned the crowd for Lucas, but he was nowhere to be seen. My colleagues were staring at me, whispering among themselves. I'd never felt so humiliated in my life. I stumbled out of the hotel, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of a nearby hotel. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I buried my face in my hands and let the tears flow freely. The events of the night replayed in my mind like a horrible movie I couldn't turn off. When I arrived at the hotel, I checked in with puffy eyes and smudged makeup, ignoring the receptionist's concerned glances. Once in my room, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the bed, still in my party dress. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had I let things get so out of hand? I loved Lucas, didn't I? So why had I been so drawn to James? The guilt was overwhelming, crushing me with its weight. Round 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from James. Emma, I'm so sorry about tonight. Can we talk? I'm in the hotel bar if you want to join me. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the delete button. I should ignore him, go to sleep, and figure out how to fix things with Lucas in the morning. That's what a good wife would do. But I wasn't feeling like a good wife. I was feeling reckless, hurt, and if I'm honest, still drawn to James despite everything. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was touching up my makeup and heading down to the bar. James was sitting alone at the far end, nursing a glass of scotch. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach. Emma, he said, as I slid onto the stool next to him. I didn't think you'd come. I signaled the bartender for a drink. Neither did I admitted, but here I am. James reached out and placed his hand over mine. I truly am sorry about what happened. I never meant to cause problems between you and Lucas. I pulled my hand away, anger flaring up again. Didn't you? You've been flirting with me for weeks, James. You knew exactly what you were doing. He had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. I did know. But Emma, I couldn't help myself. There's something between us, something special. Can you honestly say you don't feel it too? I took a long sip of my drink, letting the alcohol burn down my throat. It doesn't matter what I feel. I'm married, James. Or at least I was. James leaned in closer, his voice low and intense. But what if you weren't? What if you were free to explore this connection between us? I looked into his eyes, seeing the desire there, and felt myself being pulled in. It would be so easy to give in, to let myself fall into his arms and forget about the mess I'd made of my life. But then Lucas's face flashed in my mind, the hurt, the betrayal in his eyes. I couldn't do this. Not now, not like this. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my drink. I can't do this, James. It's not right. He reached for my hand again, but I stepped back. Emma, please, don't go. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. I'm sorry, James. This was a mistake. All of it was a mistake. I turned and fled from the bar, ignoring James calling my name behind me. I ran to the elevator, my heart pounding, and didn't breathe until the doors closed behind me. Back in my room, I collapsed onto the bed once more, this time sobbing uncontrollably. What had I done? I'd thrown away a decade of love and trust for what? A fleeting attraction to a man I barely knew. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to talk to Lucas, to beg for his forgiveness if necessary. I couldn't let our marriage end like this. I changed into the clothes I brought in my purse and checked out of the hotel. The streets were quiet as I made my way home, rehearsing what I would say to Lucas in my head. But when I arrived at our apartment, it was empty. Lucas's suitcase was gone, along with most of his clothes. On the kitchen counter was a note. Emma, I can't do this anymore. I've gone to stay with my brother for a while. Please don't try to contact me. I need time to think. Lucas. I sank to the floor, clutching the note to my chest as fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. The reality of what I'd done hit me like a freight train. I destroyed my marriage, hurt the man who had stood by me for over a decade, and for what? A fleeting attraction to a man who probably saw me as nothing more than a conquest. The next few days passed in a blur of misery and self-loathing. I called in sick to work, unable to face my colleagues after the scene at the party. I tried calling Lucas countless times, but each call went straight to voicemail. His brother refused to tell me where he was, only saying that Lucas needed space. On the fourth day of my self-imposed isolation, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Emma, we need to talk. I'm worried about you. Can I come over? I stared at the message, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to see him, to lose myself in his charm, and forget about the mess I'd made of my life. But a stronger part knew that seeing James would only make things worse. I was about to reply with a firm no when another text came through. I'm outside your apartment. Please, just 5 minutes. My heart raced as I peered through the peephole. Sure enough, James was standing the whole way, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. What are you doing here, James? I asked, my voice hoarse from days of crying. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I had to see you, Emma. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us. I crossed my arms, trying to create a barrier between us. There is no us, James. There never was. He moved closer, his eyes intense. But there could be. Emma, I know you feel something for me. Why are you fighting it? Because I'm married. I exploded, all the pent-up anger and frustration pouring out. Or at least I was, before you came along and ruined everything. James recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I ruined everything. Emma, I didn't force you to flirt with me, to dance with me. You made those choices. His words stung because they were true. I had made those choices and now I had to live with the consequences. You need to leave, I said, my voice shaking. Now. But James didn't move. Instead, He stepped closer, backing me against the wall. "Tell me you don't want me," he said, his voice low and husky. "Look me in the eye and tell me you don't feel this connection between us." I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell his intoxicating cologne. My resolve was crumbling. "James, please," I whispered, not sure if I was asking him to leave or to stay. He leaned in, his lips barely an inch from mine. "Just one kiss, Emma. One kiss, and if you can honestly say you feel nothing, I'll walk away and never bother you again." I knew I should push him away, slam the door in his face, and call Lucas to beg for forgiveness. But in that moment, with James so close and my emotions in turmoil, I made another terrible decision. I kissed him. It was like a dam bursting. All the pent-up attraction, the forbidden desire, came rushing out. James pressed me against the wall, his hands roaming my body as I tangled my fingers in his hair. It was passionate, intense, and utterly wrong. And then, just as James was reaching for the buttons on my blouse, I heard a gasp from the doorway. We sprang apart, and I felt my blood run cold as I saw who was standing there. Lucas. The look on his face was one of pure devastation. He stood frozen, his eyes darting between James and me, taking in our disheveled appearance and guilty expressions. "Lucas," I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not. I didn't." But what could I say? He had caught me in the act, confirming his worst fears. Lucas's face hardened, his eyes cold with fury and hurt. "I came to talk," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I thought maybe, just maybe, we could work things out. But I see now that was a fool's errand." He turned to James, his fists clenched at his sides. "You," he spat, "you're not content with just ruining my career, are you? You had to take my wife too." James held up his hands, taking a step back. "Lucas, man, I'm sorry. This isn't what it looks like." Lucas laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like you were going to screw my wife in our apartment. Please enlighten me as to what that really is." I stepped forward, tears streaming down my face. "Lucas, please let me explain." "Explain what, Emma?" Lucas roared, his composure finally breaking. "Explain how you've been lying to me for weeks. How you've been fantasizing about my boss while sleeping next to me every night. How you couldn't even wait a week after our fight to jump into bed with him." Each word was like a knife to my heart, because I knew they were true. I had no defense, no explanation that could justify my actions. James tried to intervene. "Look, this is my fault." I pursued Emma. Before he could finish, Lucas's fist connected with his jaw, sending James stumbling backward into the coffee table. Glass shattered as he fell, scattering across the floor. "Lucas, stop!" I screamed, grabbing his arm as he prepared to throw another punch. He shook me off violently, causing me to lose my balance and fall. I felt a sharp pain in my hand as it landed on a shard of broken glass. The sight of blood seemed to snap Lucas out of his rage. He looked at me, then at James, who was groaning on the floor, and then back to me. The anger in his eyes was replaced by something worse, complete and utter disappointment. "We're done," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce." With that, he turned and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. I sat there on the floor, blood dripping from my hand, staring at the closed door in shock. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. James groaned again, pulling himself up to a sitting position. "Emma," he said, reaching out to touch my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I jerked away from his touch as if it burned. "Don't," I hissed. "Don't you dare touch me." He looked taken aback. "Emma, Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. I never want to see you again." James opened his mouth as if to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him not to. He got to his feet, wincing slightly, and made his way to the door. "I really am sorry, Emma," he said softly before leaving. As soon as the door closed behind him, I broke down completely. Sobs racked my body as the full weight of what I'd done crashed over me. I had destroyed my marriage, betrayed the man I loved, all for a moment of passion with someone I barely knew. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and my own broken dreams. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to clean up the mess and bandage my hand. The next few weeks were a blur of misery and regret. Lucas filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. He refused to see me or speak to me, communicating only through his lawyer. I tried to call to email to explain, but he had blocked my number and email address. Work was a nightmare. Word of what happened at the party had spread, and now the story of Lucas catching me with James was making the rounds. People whispered behind my back, gave me pitying or disgusted looks. James had taken a leave of absence, probably to let the scandal die down. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office every night, because I couldn't bear to go home to an empty apartment filled with memories of my life with Lucas. But even that wasn't enough to distract me from the crushing guilt and regret that followed me everywhere. One particularly late night, about a month after the incident, I was the last one in the office. I was staring blankly at my computer screen, not really seeing the numbers in front of me, when I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see James standing in the doorway of my office. "What are you doing here?" I asked, too tired to even muster up anger. James stepped into my office, closing the door behind him. He looked different, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a few days' worth of stubble on his chin. "I had to see you, Emma," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been thinking about you non-stop. About us." I laughed bitterly. "There is no us, James. There never was. It was all just a fantasy that destroyed my life." He moved closer, his eyes intense. "It doesn't have to be that way. Emma, I think I'm in love with you." His words hit me like a physical blow. Love? How could he possibly think this was love? "You don't even know me," I said, standing up to put some distance between us. "What you're feeling isn't love. It's infatuation, maybe lust, but it's not love." James reached out, grabbing my hand. "Then let me know you. Give us a chance, Emma. Now that you're free." I yanked my hand away. "Free? Is that what you think I am? My marriage is over, my reputation is in tatters, and you think I'm free." "I didn't mean it like that," James backpedaled. "I just meant, we don't have to hide anymore. We can be together openly." I stared at him incredulous. "You really don't get it, do you? I don't want to be with you, James. What happened between us was a mistake. A horrible, life-ruining mistake." Something dark flashed in James' eyes. "A mistake? Is that all it was to you?" He advanced on me, backing me against the wall. "Tell me you didn't feel anything when we kissed. Tell me you don't still think about it." I could feel the heat of his body, smell his cologne. For a moment, I was transported back to that day in my apartment, the passion, the forbidden thrill of it all. But then Lucas's devastated face flashed in my mind, and I snapped back to reality. "Stop it," I said, pushing against his chest. "This isn't happening again." But James didn't move. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. "I know you want me, Emma. I can feel it. Just give in." His hand slid up my thigh, and for a split second, I felt my resolve waver. It would be so easy to lose myself in him, to forget about the mess my life had become. But then, like a bucket of cold water, I remembered why I was in this situation in the first place. This man, this attraction, had cost me everything. With a surge of strength, I shoved James away hard. He stumbled backward, shock written across his face. "I said no," I hissed. "What part of that don't you understand?" James's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Emma. We could be great together." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Great. You've already cost me my marriage and my reputation. What else do you want from me?" "I want you," James said, his voice low and intense. "All of you." "Well, you can't have me," I spat. "Now get out of my office before I call security." For a moment, I thought he might argue or try to touch me again, but then his shoulders slumped and he turned towards the door. "You'll regret this, Emma," he said, his hand on the doorknob. We could have had something special. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized just how close I'd come to making the same mistake twice. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. How had my life come to this? How had I gone from being happily married to sitting alone on the floor of my office, fending off advances from my soon-to-be ex-husband's former boss? When I finally picked myself up off the floor, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here in this city, surrounded by the wreckage of my former life. I needed a fresh start, somewhere far away from James, from the whispers and stares of my colleagues, from the ghost of my marriage that haunted every corner of my apartment and office. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and started searching for job opportunities in other cities. I needed a clean break, a chance to rebuild my life and my self-respect. As I scrolled through listings, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Emma, it's Lucas. We need to talk. Meet me at our old coffee shop tomorrow at 2 p.m. My heart leaped into my throat. Lucas wanted to talk. After weeks of silence and communicating only through lawyers, he was reaching out. I typed and erased several responses before simply replying, "I'll be there." Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Lucas going to give me another chance? Or was this just a formality, a face-to-face confirmation that our marriage was truly over? The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop half an hour early, my nerves frayed and my hands shaking. I ordered a latte I knew I wouldn't drink and chose a table in the corner, my eyes fixed on the door. At exactly 2 p.m., Lucas walked in, my breath caught in my throat. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that matched my own. But he was still my Lucas, the man I'd loved for over a decade. He spotted me and made his way over, his face unreadable. "Emma," he said, his voice neutral as he sat down across from me. "Lucas," I breathed, fighting the urge to reach out and touch him. "I thank you for meeting me. I've been trying to reach you." He held up a hand, cutting me off. I know. I needed time to think, to process everything. I nodded, biting my lip to keep from crying. "And have you? Processed everything, I mean?" Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I thought I had. I was ready to go through with the divorce, to put all of this behind me. But then, he trailed off, and I leaned forward, hope blooming in my chest. "Then what?" "Then I saw you with James at the office last night," he said quietly. I felt the blood drain from my face. You saw that." "Lucas, I swear nothing happened." I pushed him away. I told him. "I know," Lucas interrupted. "I saw everything. I was working late, saw the light on in your office. I was going to leave, but then I saw James go in and I couldn't help myself. I watched through the window." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. "So you saw that I rejected him. But why are we here? Why did you want to talk?" Lucas looked me in the eye for the first time since sitting down. Because seeing you pushing away, hearing you say it was a mistake, it made me realize that maybe, just maybe, we have a chance of fixing this. Tears sprang to my eyes. "Lucas, are you saying?" He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. The familiar touch sent shivers down my spine. "I'm saying I want to try, Emma. It won't be easy. We have a lot of trust to rebuild, a lot of hurt to work through. But if you're willing to put in the effort, so am I." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They flowed freely down my cheeks as I squeezed Lucas's hand. "Yes," I choked out. "Yes, I want to try. I'll do anything, Lucas. I love you so much. I'm so sorry for everything." Lucas nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I know you are. And I love you too, Emma. That's why this hurts so much. But I think our love is worth fighting for." We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, for the first time in months. We laid everything out on the table. My attraction to James, Lucas's feelings of inadequacy at work, the communication breakdown that had led us to this point. It was painful, and there were moments when I thought one of us might walk away. But we pushed through, committed to honesty and to each other. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the coffee shop windows, Lucas stood up. "Come on," he said, holding out his hand. "Let's go home." I took his hand, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. But as we walked out of the coffee shop, hand in hand, a familiar voice stopped us in our tracks. "Well, isn't this cozy?" We turned to see James standing there, his eyes blazing with anger and something that looked unsettlingly like jealousy. Lucas's grip on my hand tightened. "James," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" James laughed bitterly. "I could ask you the same thing, Lucas. Weren't you just telling everyone who would listen how your cheating wife broke your heart?" I felt Lucas tense beside me. "That's none of your business, James. We're trying to work things out." James' eyes flickered to me, a mixture of hurt and anger in his gaze. "Is that true, Emma? After everything we shared, you're just going to run back to him?" I stepped forward, putting myself between James and Lucas. "What we shared was a mistake, James. I'd love Lucas. I always have." James's face contorted with rage. "A mistake? Is that what you call it, when you were moaning my name, begging for more?" Lucas's hand slid from mine as he lunged forward, grabbing James by the collar. "You lassie dog," he growled. "Lucas, stop," I cried, trying to pull him back. "He's not worth it." But James wasn't backing down. He shoved Lucas hard, sending him stumbling backward. "Face it, Lucas," he sneered. "Your wife wanted me. She still does. You're just too pathetic to see it." Before I could react, Lucas's fist connected with James's jaw, sending him sprawling onto the sidewalk. People around us gasped and backed away, phones coming out to record the scene. "Lucas, please," I begged, grabbing his arm. "Let's just go." But James was already on his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. "That's right, run away," he taunted. "But remember this, Emma. When he can't satisfy you, when you're lying awake at night thinking of me, you know where to find me." Lucas lunged for him again, but I managed to hold him back. "He's not worth it," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Please, let's just go home." After a tense moment, Lucas nodded, allowing me to lead him away. As we walked, I could feel James' eyes boring into my back, and a shiver ran down my spine. We made it back to our apartment in silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy between us. As soon as the door closed behind us, Lucas turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "Was he telling the truth?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you sleep with him?" I felt my heart breaking all over again at the pain in Lucas's eyes. "No," I said firmly. "I swear to you, Lucas, I never slept with James. We kissed, that's all. And it was a terrible mistake that I regretted immediately." Lucas nodded slowly, processing my words. "But you wanted to," he said. "It wasn't a question." I closed my eyes, knowing I owed him complete honesty. For a moment, yes, I admitted. I was attracted to him, and I let that attraction cloud my judgment. But Lucas, it was never about James. It was about me feeling insecure, feeling like I wasn't enough. And instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst mistake of my life. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, terrified that this would be the final straw, that he would walk out and never come back. But then he stepped forward, cupping my face in his hands. "Thank you for being honest with me," he said softly. "We have a lot of work to do, Emma. A lot of trust to rebuild. But I meant what I said earlier. I want to try." Tears of relief spilled down my cheeks as I leaned into his touch. "I love you, Lucas," I whispered. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you, if that's what it takes." He leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine. "I love you too, Emma. We'll get through this together." As we stood there, holding each other in the fading light of the day, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but we were taking the first steps together. However, our moment of reconciliation was shattered by a sharp knock at the door. We pulled apart, exchanging confused glances. "Were you expecting someone?" Lucas asked. I shook my head, a sense of dread creeping over me. "No, I wasn't." Lucas moved towards the door, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said, a sudden fear gripping me. "What if it's James?" Lucas's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Stay behind me," he said, moving to open the door. But it wasn't James standing in the hallway. It was a police officer. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson?" the officer asked, his face stern. Lucas nodded, his arm instinctively moving to pull me closer. "Yes, that's us. What's this about?" The officer's gaze flickered between us. "We received a report of a physical altercation outside the Coffee Bean on 5th Street. Witnesses identified you, Mr. Thompson, as the aggressor. I'm going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." My heart sank. James had called the police. Of course he had. This was his revenge for my rejection. "Officer, please," I stepped forward. "It wasn't like that. James was provoking us. Man, the officer cut me off. "I understand you want to defend your husband, but we need to follow procedure. Mr. Thompson, if you'll come with me, please." Lucas turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and resignation. "It's okay, Emma. I'll go. Call our lawyer, all right." As the officer led Lucas away, I felt my world crumbling again. Just when we had started to rebuild, James had found a way to tear us apart once more. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and anxiety. Our lawyer assured me that Lucas would likely be released soon, that it was just a misunderstanding. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of James' retaliation. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "How does it feel, Emma? To watch your precious husband being taken away in handcuffs. This is just the start. You'll regret choosing him over me. Jay." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. This wasn't over. James wasn't going to let us go that easily. Just as I was contemplating my response, there was another knock at the door. My heart raced as I approached, praying it wasn't James. To my relief, it was Lucas. He looked exhausted, his shirt rumpled, and his eyes bloodshot. Without a word, I pulled him into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," I whispered against his chest. "This is all my fault." Lucas pulled back, cupping my face in his hands. "No, Emma, this isn't your fault. It's James. He's not going to let us be happy." I showed him the text message, watching as his face darkened with anger. "We need to do something about him," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. "He can't keep threatening us like this." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. What should we do? Lucas was quiet for a moment, then he met my eyes with a steely gaze. We fight back. We gather evidence of his harassment, his abuse of power at work. We take him down before he can destroy us. The intensity in Lucas's voice both thrilled and terrified me. This was a side of him I'd never seen before, and I wasn't sure if I should be scared or excited. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where do we start?" Lucas pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I still have contacts of the company, people who owe me favors. We start there." As I watched Lucas make calls and send messages, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that we were united against a common enemy, fear of what James might do next, and an unexpected thrill at the idea of taking him down. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a dangerous game that would push our rekindled relationship to its limits and force us to confront dark truths about ourselves and each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of covert meetings and late-night strategy sessions. Lucas and I threw ourselves into gathering evidence against James, reaching out to former colleagues who had their own stories of his misconduct and abuse of power. One particularly tense evening, we were huddled over our dining room table, sorting through a pile of documents when my phone buzzed. It was another message from James. "I see you two playing detective. Cute. But remember, I have friends in high places. You can't touch me. Jay. I showed the message to Lucas, watching as his face hardened. He's bluffing, he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. What if he's not? I asked, fear creeping into my tone. What if we're in over our heads? Lucas reached across the table, taking my hand in his. We're in this together, Emma. We can't let him win. As I looked into Lucas's eyes, I felt a surge of love and admiration for him. Despite everything I'd put him through, he was still here fighting for us. It made me want to fight harder too. But our renewed closeness didn't come without complications. The stress of our situation, combined with the lingering hurt from my betrayal, often led to heated arguments that would explode out of nowhere. One night, after a particularly frustrating dead end in our investigation, Lucas lashed out. If you hadn't been so easily swayed by James' charm, we wouldn't be in this mess. The words stung, and I felt my own anger rising. Oh, so this is all my fault. You're the one who let him walk all over you at work for months. We stood there, glaring at each other, the air thick with tension. Then, without warning, Lucas grabbed me and kissed me hard. It was a kiss full of anger, frustration, and pent-up desire. I responded with equal fervor, my hands tangling in his hair as he pushed me against the wall. Our lovemaking that night was intense and almost desperate, as if we were trying to exorcise all our demons through physical connection. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, I couldn't help but wonder if this volatile mix of emotions was healthy or if we were just spiraling further into chaos. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I received an email that made my blood run cold. It was from the HR department, requesting my presence for an urgent meeting. When I opened the attachment, I saw a series of screenshots, private messages between Lucas and me discussing our plans to take down James. My hands shook as I called out to Lucas. Then no, I said, my voice trembling. James, he's made his move. Lucas read the email, his face growing pale. How did he get these? You were so careful. As we stood there, the reality of our situation sinking in, my phone buzzed again. Another message from James. Checkmate. Meet me at the Skyline Hotel, room 1504, at 8 p.m. if you want to save your careers. Come alone, Emma? Jay. I showed Lucas the message, watching as a myriad of emotions flashed across his face. Anger, fear, and finally, resignation. You can't go, he said, his voice tight. It's not safe. But we both knew I had no choice. James held all the cards now. I have to, I said softly, but I'll be careful. I promise. As I prepared to meet James that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. But what choice did I have? Our careers, our reputations, our entire future hung in the balance. I arrived at the Skyline Hotel at 7:55 p.m., my heart pounding as I rode the elevator to the 15th floor. As I stood outside room 1504, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay on the other side of that door. I knocked, and after a moment that felt like an eternity, the door swung open. James stood there, a smug smile on his face. Emma, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. So glad you could make it. Please come in. As I stepped into the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. The suite was luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights. James gestured for me to sit on the plush sofa, while he poured 2 glasses of wine at the minibar. I'm not here to socialize, James, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What do you want? James chuckled, sauntering over with the wine glasses. Always so direct, Emma. It's one of the things I admire about you. He held out a glass to me, which I reluctantly accepted. You have information that could ruin Lucas and me, I said, cutting to the chase. What's your price? James's smile widened, and I felt my stomach churn. My price? Oh, Emma, you misunderstand. I don't want money. He sat down next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. It brought back memories of that fateful kiss, and I had to suppress a shudder. What I want, James continued, his voice low and intense, is you. I recoiled, nearly spilling my wine. What? You can't be serious. Oh, but I am, James said, his eyes never leaving mine. One night with you, Emma, that's my price. Give me that, and all the evidence disappears. You and Lucas can go back to your happy little life, and I'll never bother you again. I stood up abruptly, putting distance between us. You're insane if you think I'd ever agree to that. I love Lucas. I won't betray him again. James leaned back, seemingly unfazed by my rejection. Noble sentiment, Emma. But think about it. One night of discomfort for you in exchange for saving both your careers? Seems like a small price to pay. The answer is no, I said firmly, though my voice shook slightly. Find another way to get your revenge, James. I won't play your game. I turned to leave, but James' next words stopped me cold. You know, it's not just your careers at stake here, he said casually. I have some interesting information about Lucas' past that I'm sure the police would love to hear about. I whirled around, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? James's smile was predatory now. Let's just say your dear husband isn't as squeaky clean as he pretends to be. Little incident from his college days. Something involving drugs and a car accident. Ring any bells? My blood ran cold. Lucas had told me about that night, how he'd made a stupid mistake that had almost ruined his life. But he'd never been caught, never charged. How did James know? You're bluffing, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. James shrugged. Maybe I am. But are you willing to take that chance? One night, Emma. That's all I'm asking. And all of this goes away. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. The thought of betraying Lucas again made me sick. But the alternative, if James went to the police with that information, Lucas could go to jail. Our lives would be destroyed. I need time to think, I stammered. James nodded, standing up and walking to the door. You have until midnight. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll assume your answer is no, and I'll proceed accordingly. As I left the hotel room, my head was spinning. I felt dirty, trapped and utterly helpless. How had things spiraled so far out of control? I walked aimlessly through the city streets, trying to clear my head and figure out what to do. The thought of giving in to James' demands made me feel physically ill, but the alternative seemed even worse. Around 11:30 p.m., I found myself back at our apartment. Lucas was waiting up, his face etched with worry. Emma, thank God, he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. What happened? What did James want? I pulled away, unable to meet his eyes. Lucas, we need to talk. As I recounted my conversation with James, leaving out the specifics of his demand, I watched Lucas's face grow pale. He knows about the accident, Lucas whispered, sinking onto the couch. How is that possible? I sat next to him, taking his hand in mine. I don't know, Lucas, but he's threatening to go to the police if we don't give him what he wants. Lucas's grip on my hand tightened. What does he want, Emma? Money? My resignation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for his reaction. He wants me, one night with me, and he says he'll destroy all the evidence and leave us alone. Lucas jerked away from me as if I'd burned him. What? No, absolutely not. We'll find another way. What other way, Lucas? I asked, tears welling up in my eyes. If he goes to the police with that information about your accident, you could go to jail. We'd lose everything. Lucas stood up, pacing the room. So your solution is to sleep with him? To betray me again? His words stung, but I knew I deserved them. It wouldn't mean anything, Lucas. It would just be a transaction to save us. Lucas stopped pacing, turning to look at me with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. Do you hear yourself, Emma? You're talking about prostituting yourself to my former boss. How could you even consider that? Because I love you. I cried, standing up to face him. Because I can't bear the thought of losing you, of watching our lives fall apart because of my mistakes. I'd do anything to fix this, Lucas. Anything. We stood there, staring at each other, the air thick with tension. Then, without warning, Lucas pulled me into a fierce kiss. It was desperate, passionate, filled with all the anger and fear and love we'd been grappling with. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against mine. "We'll find another way," he said softly. "Together. I won't let you sacrifice yourself like that, Emma. We're stronger than James's threats." As the clock struck midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Time's up. What's your answer?" With shaking hands, I typed out a response. "The answer is no, to your worst." Lucas and I spent the next few days in a state of high anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But nothing happened. No police, no new threats from James. A week later, we received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a USB drive containing all the evidence James had against us, along with a note. "You passed the test. Enjoy your life together." We later learned that James had been involved in a car accident the night after our meeting at the hotel. He survived, but suffered a head injury that seemed to have changed his personality. He quit the company and left, leaving us alone, and we were grateful to fate for this gift.